And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101. I'm David Hines, and I want to welcome everybody down to the show this evening. Promises to be an interesting show. We are dealing with some pertinent issues this evening. We want to talk about this business of a news list. As you know, GCOM is in the process of continuing registration, and they have said nothing about cleaning up that voters list, which has been a problem going right back to the 2006 election, and it has not been settled. And we know that that list came into play at the last election. When you have elections in disputed, well, not disputed, but divided societies like ours, and election results are very close, then every issue becomes a very important issue, and the voters list becomes important. So we want to talk about the voters list this afternoon, whether the opposition should contest an election with the current voters list. We know that the PNC/AFC, that is the coalition, ended a meeting with GCOM sometime last week, and they drew to GCOM's attention that there are a lot of outstanding issues that GCOM needs to take care of, and one of those issues, of course, is the voters list. The delegation was not clear whether they were saying to GCOM, don't have an election with that voters list, or whether they were in effect saying that the opposition should not or would not participate in an election with a faulty voters list. That we're not clear about. But we are going to try to answer that question this evening. Should the opposition participate in an election with the current voters list? We, of course, have other issues in the news. There is a contest for leadership of the trade union, the Guyana Teachers Union, having their elections. It's going on right now. Last week we had Vanessa Kisuna on, who is challenging Mr. Mark Light for the presidency of that union, and Coretta McDonald, who is contesting for her current position as General Secretary of the Union. And those two ladies were on last week, and they made their case. And we have decided that we will treat that issue as a top issue, because lots of questions have been raised about the trade unions, the state of trade unionism in Guyana. My brother Tukumo Ogunse raised that question, and Mr. Lincoln Lewis, my other brother, responded, and I am not too satisfied. The exchange has degenerated into what the WPA didn't do when they were in office or when they were not in office. It's a straight question. What is the state of the trade unions? It's a people's organization. It is up against a dictatorship. And it's a legitimate question. If it's legitimate to ask the political parties in the opposition, why are they not doing this? Why are they not doing that? It's legitimate to ask the trade unions. What is the state of trade unionism? Why is it that trade unions have not been able to mobilize their membership to come out and strike against a government that is treating public servants, workers, and other workers with scant regard? It's a legitimate question. And so therefore, for me, the leadership for the Guyana Teachers Union, which is a union that has been at odds with this government and previous governments, let's not forget that it's not just this government, but the previous government. The teachers have had to fight governments to get those governments to react to the teachers' issues. What would somebody like Vanessa Kisuna, the head of the union, what would that do? How would that change? How could it change things? We'll talk a little bit about that. We had a ruling from the CCJ last week, I think it was, in which Marcus Bisram, that case has been going on and on and on. The man was set free, and then the DPP ordered the magistrate to do a retrial. The very magistrate that tried the case, the CCJ says that that is not constitutional. And so Bisram is free. But the powers of the CCJ has been one area of our power structure that we have constantly talked about. So those are the major issues we intend to deal with this afternoon, this evening. And we have our team to take us behind the news. And we're going to deal with that. I just want to welcome everybody down. Welcome. Please do what you have to do to ensure that everyone knows that the program is on, and that we are dealing with some very important issues here this evening. This week promises to be another week in which we take on some serious issues. Tomorrow, March the 23rd, Dr. Walter Rodney lived. He would have been 80 years old. And so tomorrow we want to deal with Walter Rodney at 80, as we say, Walter Rodney at 80. We're gonna have a team of his comrades on tomorrow. We're gonna have the Venerable EUC Kwayana. EUC is spelled wrong, it's EUSI. EUC Kwayana, but the Venerable EUC Kwayana will correct that. Brother Kukumo Gunsi, Dr. Wazir Mohammed. That's tomorrow evening. And then on Thursday evening, we're going to have an Economics 101 program. Professor Clive Thomas is going to be on to take a look at the economy. So we have quite a lineup here this week, taking on some very important issues, as we have said over and over. Despite what is said about these programs that we do in the evenings, whether it's Mark Benshop's program, which closes off the evening, or Sherrod Duncan, or Kedaki Amsterdam in the morning, Rickford Burke, and the other programs, Randolph Critchlow and others. that despite what they say, these programs are not programs in which we spend our time cussing out people and that other stuff. We deal with serious issues, and we try to answer questions. We try to bring education to our people, and we try to mobilize our people to remain engaged, to use these platforms at our disposal, and to remain engaged. Whenever I am being partisan, I will tell the audience I'm being partisan. And every now and again, we will do partisan programs. But my objective is to use these platforms to mobilize our people at the level of education, analysis, and learning, as old people would say, in our communities. And that's what we'll do. So tonight, we are going to be dealing with this issue of elections. That is a lead issue. And then we will deal with the other issues. I have a packed panel tonight, bringing back some of the people. The last 2 weeks ago, Mark Benchop was on the Behind the News program. He's back tonight. Mark Benchop is back tonight. Adam Harris is coming in a few, and we have 2 new additions to our lineup this week. Kidaki Amsterdam, who needs no introduction to you, and someone who has not been on in quite a while, Sharma Solomon. And I want to say that these panelists, some of them are political party activists, and I know Kidaki and Sharma Solomon belong to political parties. I want to tell our audience they're not here in their party capacity. They're here as analysts, as commentators. I want to bear that in mind. If they make reference to their party, that's their business. But they're not here to give party views. As you noticed last week, we did a program on the opposition. We had the AFC, the WPA, and the PNC on, and we made it very clear that those people were on to talk about their parties. Tonight, they're going to deal with the issues. We want to, as I said, set an example to others that we can fight our party fight. We have to do that. But we have to be big people and understand that parties come and parties go. Country and the issues that we face in our country, regardless of which party is in power, will remain there. And we, as I said, we want to set an example, not just to people on our side, but people on the other side, of what a human community should be about. We're not animals. Can't be scratching and carrying on like dog and cat on a daily basis. Right? We want to deal with issues. Gentlemen, welcome to Politics 101.
Thank you, Dr. Hans, and good evening to your viewers and your listeners and my other guest. Your other guest. Good evening to all.
Good evening, Dr. Hines. Good evening to the other panelists, and good evening to the audience of Politics 101. Good to be back.
Thank you very much. You all, my introduction. The People's National Congress, the AFC, the coalition, they met with GCOM recently to talk about the house registration, the continuing registration, and the state of readiness of GCOM to hold a proper election. The voters list has been a big issue coming out of the last election. We're in the and they're talking about the anniversary that happened years ago, and that there are people who did not comment on rigged elections and all that kind of stuff. You know, I had to tell somebody the other day, I am against mistabulating votes. I am against a bloated voters list. I am against people voting when they're not in the country. I am against dead people voting. I am against boxes with votes inside but no statutory document. When I started to oppose free and fair election, those things we talked about. We talked about people voting multiple times, people voting when they're not in the district, people impersonating other voters. All of a sudden, the test of a free and fair election is about what somebody see on a certain night in a certain building. And they're not talking about a bloated list. They're not talking about people voting when they're not supposed to be voting. They're not in the constituency. They're not talking about 40-odd boxes. So those are things, when we talk about free and fair election, those things were part of why elections were not free and fair. But let me ask you all this general question, each of you, and that is, how do you define free and fair elections? Mark Bishop, I'll give you the new ball.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. I'm here not just as a political activist, but also I've always been more as a social activist. And I just want to make, before I answer that question, because I see a silly comment in the comment section where a PPP supporter is asking the coalition to show their SOPs. Look, when are you guys going to stop with this nonsense? The SOPs are there. The PPP, the installed PPP regime, are the ones who are in office right now. They have control of the SOPs and all of the other things. So focus your direction, sir, in the direction of the PPP. Focus your question to the installed PPP. Ask them, why aren't they showing all of the SOPs now so we can see who really rigged the elections, right? Why aren't they concerned about the elections petitions being heard? Why aren't they concerned about that? That should be priority. Almost a year and a half now, we're not hearing anything about the elections petitions being heard. The opposition seem to be sleeping about that, not because a matter is set for the court. They gotta go out there and push the court system, the judicial system, so that they can prioritize the elections petition, man. We want to hear the elections petitions. We want those ballot boxes to be open. We want to count all of the dead voters. We want to count all of the voters, Dr. Hines, that you spoke about, the people who reside overseas, never entered Guyana on elections day, but yet they voted. All of these things we want to hear, but we can only hear them via an elections petition. Obviously, the PPP is afraid of the elections petitions. Now, I said all of that in the beginning because I looked at your comment. Somebody commented about SOPs, the nonsense about SOPs. And now I forgot what your question is about.
You've already begun to answer the question. My question is, how do you define a free and fair election?
Free and fair elections is exactly what I just said there.
Yes,
Dr.
that's why I said you answered it.
We want all of the votes, the valid votes, ought to be counted. We don't want rotten votes. And it's kind of like what Mike Pompeo, the then the vagabond at the U.S. State Department, who was Secretary of State, who said in the American elections, after all the votes are counted, after all the valid votes are counted, then a declaration would be made. But that's not what he said in Guyana. They want rotten votes, dead people vote, people who live in Queens, wherever they live in the Bronx, in Canada, wherever, on the rooftop, in the ceiling, in basements. They want all those people, all those rotten votes to be counted and then declared. And when you declare it, it shows that the PPPC has won. I don't know, but that's not free and fair elections to me. Free and fair elections also, Dr. Hines, is you do not go into an election knowing that the list is bloated and expect the results to be free and expect the elections to be free and fair. It cannot be free and fair. And the coalition government should not have been forced, allowed foreign forces to force them to hold an elections with the voters list is as big as the population. Impossible. It was a recipe for disaster. And look, it was indeed a disaster.
Amsterdam, let me bring you in here. Your definition of what is a free and fair election.
Good evening, viewers, and my fellow panelists, host Dr. Hines. What do I define as a free and fair election? A free and fair election is one for me which meets the criteria established internationally for free and fair elections. If I can enumerate on them, I basically believe that first and foremost, you must have an accurate or almost accurate electoral roll. The rules must be followed. Whatever the laws prescribe in relation to the holding of an election must be followed. A free and fair election is one that is free from voter intimidation and voter suppression. A free and fair election is one that makes the voting station accessible. Those are some of the criteria for me, which will constitute a free and fair election.
What about people voting who are in the jurisdiction?
Well, like I said, it must follow the prescribed rules. And the rules, as far as we know, is that you have to be in the country to vote. You have to have resided in the country for a particular period of time, a particular duration before you're allowed to vote. Your name must be on the voters registration, voters roll. And that is why I spoke to an accurate electoral roll. Because an accurate electoral roll will weed out all of those persons who are not entitled to vote for the fact that they do not reside in the country or in the jurisdiction. It will weed out all of those persons who cannot vote because they are dead. It will weed out all of those persons who appear on the electoral roll multiple times. And so those are all things which will contribute to a free and fair election. And so in short, like I'm repeating, a free and fair election is one which is held in keeping with all of the rules.
Bashar Solomon, welcome to Politics 101 again. What's your definition of a free and fair election?
Thanks for having me on again, Dr. Hines, and to your panelists, to your audience. I'd like to pick up from 2 points that Mark mentioned earlier and put into context all the things that Kadaki spoke about, including yourself, that sums up what a free and fair election should be. And that goes back into when we had those voices chanting that we had environments which did not provide for free and fair elections. And we go all the way back into 87, coming to where we had the electoral reforms because of those voices saying what they considered to not be free, fair, and elections above par. And what sort of pressure, coming to the second point that Mark made, of the international forces, what sort of collective pressure we had placed then on the government to ensure that free and fair elections included having constitutional changes, more so electoral reforms in the area of maybe things such as counting at the place of polls and including a new voters list because of those same claims of padded lists of voters who are not existing that are voting. And I think now is the ideal time, not only for that claim to be made, where the list stands and the objections that we have now of if we will have a free and fair election, but it justifies why we should go after ensuring that we clean that list up. And those same partners, just like they did before, and this is where you see the issue of foreign policy being shaped by international matters and how it converge with domestic issues. Our electoral system, how they who interfered in 2020 and interfered even when in 1990 by being a part of whether we had to conform to these constitutional reforms, whether we had to involve the Carter Center. We should be going beyond now the Republican Institute to move towards not just the presence of those foreign partners who are still overlooking our electoral system, but to ensure that it go further to have, as the opposition and rightly so is calling for, a more improved list, because we have concerns like in the past to justify why that list should be updated. And I think that answers your question, Dr. Hines, about setting the environment for free and fair elections, because it justifies what constituted an improved list in the past.
Thank you very much, Sharma, and Kodaki and Mark and Sharma. Your point is well taken. I was part of that struggle when in 1990 elections were due. And the Carter Center gotten the PPP, the WPA, and other opposition parties, along with the PNC, to agree to some reforms before that election. And one of the reforms was an acceptable voters list. And I remember when the elections came due, the question was, should we go along with the elections without the Carter reforms kicking in? And the PPP was the only one who wanted to go ahead with the election, right? The WPA said no. And they went to Parliament and they passed the law extending the election time up to October 1992 until the reforms were put in place. And it was about a new GCOM structure, a new voters list, and all the other things that you talked about had to be put in place. We in Guyana always knew that the definition of a free election was what we said, an election that was free and fair and free from fear. And it always included 9 or 10 things. All of a sudden, in 2020, the only requirement for a free election is that you must count what's in the box. And you must not deal with the other issues. God not sleep. God not sleep. The recount, which a lot of us felt was unconstitutional and should not have been undertaken. When that recount was undertaken, we got the fullness of what goes on in elections in Guyana. 40-odd boxes without statutory document. The police said people were not the PNC, not the AFC, the police said people were not in the country and they voted. GCOM set aside boxes. Kidaki, you were there with the counting. I don't know if Sharma was there. When they found these boxes with anomalies, initially what GCOM did, put them aside, which means GCOMs agreed that there were boxes with tainted votes. Under pressure from PPP forces, also because of the court ruling, those tainted boxes were counted. It meant, therefore, we had an election that was decided by tainted votes, votes that tainted. That is what happened. The court took the position that we are not saying there weren't tainted votes. But bring that in a petition. The argument has always been when the PPP saw or said they saw Mr. Mingo tabulating votes on a piece of paper. When they went to the court would tell them, come the votes and come with that Mingo thing in a petition after the election. The court didn't do that. The court heard the PPP's accusations and come fix it. When the coalition accusations were put on the table, the court said, don't fix it. Come the vote and bring it in a petition. That is what we had for an election. And that is why persons like myself never came out and condemned any rigging, because we saw that both sides were making accusations of rigging. And we were never going to call out one side without calling out the other side when the evidence is there on the table. And so therefore, this thing about narrowing the definition of a free and fair election is a 3-card trick or a 4-card trick they're playing on the Chinese people. No. We now know, while we wait on the petition, we know that GCOM has a lot of work. The CARICOM team said that GCOM is in no position to carry out a free and fair election. Of course, the same CARICOM said that although GCOM don't have the capacity to carry out a free and fair elections, they should go ahead and declare a winner based on. So CARICOM is saying that the elections of 2020 was not properly conducted, but they agree to name a winner on an election that was not properly conducted. CARICOM did that. They ought to be ashamed of themselves, I think. Right? Because Myanmar will not allow that in our country. Ralph Gonsalves will not allow that in St. Vincent. But they were prepared to allow it in Guyana because we are mudland, it seems. And we can be treated anyway. I'm a Caribbean man, but I have to call out my brother and sister because they were engaged in something that they would not allow in their country. I know that. Ralph will not allow that in St. Vincent. Mia would not allow that in Barbados. None of the CARICOM leaders would allow that in their country. But they were prepared to do it in Guyana. So GCOM has all these problems. We are now talking about a new election first, the local government election, and then we heard the PPPs talking about some snap election. The opposition parties met last week, and they talked to GCOM, and they told GCOM that you have all these problems and you should not hold an election based on what the mechanism that you have. First and foremost, a current voters list. The big question before us tonight, should the opposition contest an election with a flawed voters list? Now, the court has said that you can't take people off the list of registrants. The voters list is extracted from that list of registrants. It seems to me that the PPP's argument that you can clean a very bloated voters list by claims and objections sounds nice. Oh, claims and objections, somebody go into Strathspey and say, I see Dindial Meme and Dindial they in New York. So you take off your name from a list. How can someone who doesn't live in a district PNC person go into Enmore and say Mr. Dindial or Miss Savitri or whoever is on this list, but they gone a Queens. Claims and objections, it seems to me, can, correct a few things, but it cannot clean a voters list. But that's only my view. Let's hear from the other brothers here. Brothers, and I start with you, Mark. Can this claims and objection period clean that voters list? Mark, I start with you.
Yeah, Dr. Hines, sorry about that. In order to, if they want to really, and I'm looking for something
Okay.
if they really want to take those names off the voters list, like those who are residing overseas, who have resided overseas for all those years and have not gone to Guyana, then the list, those names should be removed. But they has to be, the law has to be amended for these things. And we can talk from now until cow come home, so to speak, until the cows come home. The laws have to be amended for these things to become a reality. Now, I was looking for a post in which I made in 2019, and this is in response to, I noticed one of your, somebody made a comment there by the name of Rodney. And Rodney, I hope he's probably no relation to Dr. Walter Rodney, who would have been celebrating his 80th anniversary, birth anniversary tomorrow. But in 2019, it's probably a little too, in 2019, and this is for that listener, Mr. Rodney. He's saying, why is Ben Chapo only talking these things now about the bloated list? That's wrong. In 2019, or even before that, but there is a post, there's the evidence. When Sarah Ann Lynch, the current U.S. ambassador to Guyana, when she touched down there, on March 17, 2019, there was a post made by yours truly. It says here, I am particularly impressed by her statement back then. She said, moving forward, I quote here, moving forward, we will continue to encourage genuinely free and fair elections, freedom of speech and assembly, multi-party representation, and constitutional judicial process, blah, blah, blah. End of quote. Now, this is what I ended in 2019 by saying, before the March 2020 elections. I said, hence, the inflated voters list needs to be sanitized before the next general and regional elections are held. So this is nothing new for me talking about a bloated list. I've always, years ago, spoke about this voters list, Mr. Rodney. And then I noticed there's another comment about Bornham. Oh man, Bornham died since 1985. Majority of the population probably wasn't even born then. Everything you guys bringing in Bornham, what the voters list got to do with Bornham? What free and fair elections got to do with Bornham? Elections were proven to be rigged by the PPP. 2006, a seat was stolen from the AFC. The WPA didn't steal that seat. The PNC didn't steal that seat. It was the PPP who stole that seat. In 2011, there was a minority government, the PPP minority government, headed by Donald Ramotar. Had it not been for the vigilance, like some folks, Vincent Alexander, and another unnamed individual who caught the PPP red-handed in the act of attempting to steal an extra seat to give themselves a majority. They were caught. So don't tell me about Bornham and rigged elections that was never proven. It was never proven, mind you. Now, Dr. Hines, you said that you guys, or you have taken a position where you can't blame. You don't know who to blame. But I'll tell you this, Dr. Hines, and your listeners, that I'll blame the PPP. The evidence that I saw coming out during the recount process suggests to me, and even the smallest child out there, that the PPP is the only party that did majority of the rigging order to tamper with the final result. We saw what happened with those 47 ballot boxes on the lower East Coast. We saw what happened in Region 1. I believe it's the presiding officer, the returning officer, took over a month before he delivered those statutory documents, some of which were missing. All of these things we saw. Every single thing we saw. So gosh, Dr. Hines, even Stevie Wonder can see what the PPP did with the help of external forces in rigging the March general and regional elections. Maybe that explains why they no longer want to show the SOPs. Maybe that explains why they don't want the elections petitions to be heard.
Yes, and of course, I didn't say that we didn't know. I'm saying that both sides made the charges of free and fair election, and because of those charges, I am not prepared to blame any one side and say that side rigged. The recount showed that there were tremendous discrepancies. And
Dr. Hines,
admitted
if somebody thief cows,
yeah.
Let's say y'all got Philip here in his village, and y'all coming and looking to see who thief sheep or cows or goats, and you run into the three of us, Kadaki, Sharma, and myself, and you see that all of the sheep and the cows are in Sharma Solomon's yard. One sheep in my yard, one goat in Kadaki's yard. Who did the most thieving? Or you gonna say all of we thief? Sharma Solomon. And in this case, it's the PPP. The evidence is pointing in the direction of the PPP that they have rigged the March 2020 election. They have rigged the elections. That is why they're afraid of the elections petition, Dr. David Hines. They are afraid because they know what they did. And we got to call a spade, that the PPP, forget about the probably little jiggery pokery from the PNC side, which has not, or the AP and UFC, which has not been proven. But we see all the evidence pointing in the direction of the PPP, man. Let's be reasonable. They rigged the election.
And that is why the petitions are so important. Like Amsterdam, let me bring you in here. Can that voters list be clean by house-to-house registration? If not, how do we clean that list? You're not, your audio is off.
You said a house-to-house registration.
Not, can it be cleaned by claims and objections? Sorry.
Oh, certainly not. I don't think it can be cleaned by claims and objections. Claims and objections to me are about the minor things, individual things. A person's name might be spelled incorrectly. They make a claim to have that fixed. Objection to some other minor issue. But when you look at some of the things which were found in the last election, right? For example, you had migrants, a total of 4,803 migrants voting in that election. It means that there were 4,803 persons on the list that were not in the jurisdiction, according to the revelations, but voted. Claims and objection, how do you use claims and objection to get rid of 4,800 persons from the list? Especially given the fact that when you make an objection, you have to provide the evidence to effect the changes which should result from that objection. Say, for example, someone is on the list who is deceased. You know for a fact that this individual is deceased. You make a claim that, look, you all got a dead person's name on the list. It has to come off. One of the requirements is that you have to present the death certificate to get that person removed. Now, if the dead person's relatives are interested in them remaining there because it's a source of rigging the election for their party, who is going to provide the death certificate? because it is the relatives who, in my mind, ought to apply for and get that certificate and present it. I, as an outsider, no relation to the dead, as far as I understand, can't go and get a death certificate to prove that this person is dead and get them off the list. And so, even if you're saying claims and objection has the capacity to do it, the requirement to satisfy your objections is like passing a camel through the eye of a needle. Because as long as I want to use the process, I want to rig the process, I'm not going to cooperate. I'm not going to work with the authorities to get those names off of the list. Again, if I say, look, Tom Jones is my neighbor, and Tom Jones left the country since 1976, but his name is on the list, I have to prove to the authorities that that is so, that Tom Jones has never come back. And perhaps Tom Jones will never come back. The immigration records are supposed to help to make that claim. Who controls the immigration department? The very government who controls the list that they want to rig with. So how does claim and objection meet the standard or get to achieve the clearing of the list? And there are so many other scenarios that I can create to show that claims and objection cannot in any way get those persons who are on the list off of the list.
How are we going to, from your standpoint, what's the best way to clean the list?
The best way to clean the list is, or should have been, by the house-to-house registration. Because you have to be in the jurisdiction to be registered. And when you register house-to-house, that helps to create a new NRR, or update the NRR, which is the National Register of Registrants. Basically a list of all the citizens, and it will give you the ages and who is eligible to vote and so on. From that NRR is where they extract the voters list or the preliminary voters list. And so if you get a proper NRR, a good and proper register of registrants, and you go through the correct procedure to extract those who are eligible to vote, you will get a clean voters list. But when you consider, for example, Ghana has about 750,000 persons. The last list of electors was about 88% of the adult population, right? Almost 90%, 600 and something thousand persons, 660,998, almost 661,000 persons were on that list as eligible to vote. It means that your NRR is inaccurate. It got a lot of dead people in it. It got a lot of migrants in it. And so if you were to extract from that NRR, you will end up with a fraudulent or inaccurate voters list. So house to house should be able to fix that. The issue that we are confronted with now, though, is the fact that all the challenges on the March 2020 elections have resulted in the court's ruling that, hey, regardless of what you do, you can't take nobody off this list, right? So to fix it, like Mark rightly said, you have to go to the National Assembly and pass a law that, quote unquote, will override the ruling of the courts to get it fixed. But you are not going to get anybody to go, at least the government is not going to take any motion to the parliament to pass that law because the current situation suits them. So to get it clear, I will say this: activism, boots on the ground. The opposition has to dig its heels in. We will not partake in any election. We will not support any election. We will not allow any election unless the list is cleaned. And these are the things which are necessary for cleaning the list. And so until these things are done, we are not in support of any election. That is the only way to get it clean. The opposition has to dig its heels in, and its supporters have to stand behind them.
Mr. Solomon?
Hey, Dr. Hines, before you go to Mr. Solomon, can I get 30 seconds, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. I notice Akani Blair is addressing us as fools. This is the same Akani Blair that got caught up in corruption at Guy Oil that should have been in jail, mind you, right? So I just thought I'd remind people that Akani Blair with a bunch of corruption at Guy Oil and all manner of criminal or
Some people should just be tied up like their predecessors.
yeah, exactly. So he's an alleged crook. But in terms of when it comes to cleaning of the list,
No matter, let's get Sharma, and I
yeah,
noticed.
but 30 seconds, 30 seconds, Dr. Hines.
So let's get
Yeah,
in.
30 seconds. All I'm asking for is 30 seconds.
Okay, go ahead.
The cleaning of the list will not solve the problem. The PPP will take this, they're going to say to the opposition, y'all want 10,000 people off the list? We can clean the list. Y'all satisfied? But they're going to add 30,000 new registrants, the Venezuelans and the Brazilians and others. And that's where the problem lies. But sorry, go ahead.
Yes, Doc. I think Kadaki made some of the most valid points about where we are, and it ended right where Mark started, where that no matter what we do, the courts have spoken on this matter with regards to house and the state of the list. And no amount of verification would do any sanitizing to that list to the extent that it becomes acceptable. So you need legislative movement to have anything done. Again, and we go right back to the 90s, and I am going there because it brings the point of unity, of where the opposition finds itself. Its effectiveness to be able to agitate the sort of outcomes, to lobby the international community, to get the sort of understanding of where the matter is. First, I think that's the first point of addressing the current state of the list, to have that sort of pressure so that you have legislative movement to change fundamentally what is wrong with the stage of GECOM, in particular the list. But I think in the interim to deal with that, I know there are recommendations that are being made to ensure that should we go to elections, what sort of mechanisms we can also adopt. And I know a few years ago, even at the University of Guyana, it was sampled, whether it's biometrics. And I know GECOM commissioners in Vincent Alexander and others who have even touted to have the issue of biometrics being introduced, which eradicates. I mean, we are in the 21st century, voting around the world, even in Guyana at the experimental stage of UG, and the Canadians had attempted the use of biometrics. And I think those are some of the things we must introduce into the conversation as much as we push for legislative change. But mind you, legislative change becomes very, very important, because in the past, those same partners, our bilateral partners, our multilateral partners, whether they're CARICOM, whether it's the United States, they have accepted the argument when we had issues before with our elections, what needed to be changed. And pressure was brought to the government then, and I believe pressure should be now on the government to make the necessary changes. And even if that requires legislative approach to be done. But there are also mechanisms that we must ask the parties along with GECOM to explore so that we can overcome the issue of a stagnation of how important it is to get past a bloated list and what is needed. There are other mechanisms that we can use, and I think we should look at those mechanisms.
Adam Maris, welcome. Adam, we're talking about the voters list and how we go about getting a proper voters list. You know, you're very strong on the issue of the voters list. The people is arguing that you can clean the voters list with claims and objection. Do you share that view? If not, how do we go about cleaning that voters list?
I heard Kidaki and I heard Mr. Solomon just now. Incidentally, I was invited for 7 o'clock, but I noticed it started at 6:30.
Yes.
Anyhow.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
That's all right. No quarrel. No quarrel. What I'm saying is cleaning the list as it stands is going to be difficult. Don't worry with claims and objections. In the first instance, I don't think the party has enough people on the ground to properly scrutinize the list. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the period for claims and objections, I think, is 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, to sanitize a list with 600,000 people would take close to 1,000 party workers going house to house with the list, checking names and addresses and all of that. So this whole question of claims and objections not gonna work. You file the claims, there is no guarantee that GCOM will accept them. And in the past, and Mr. Solomon is aware of this, you submitted many objections, and then you had to go and try to prove them in the limited time, and we couldn't. Kidaki says house-to-house registration, I agree. The court ruled recently about you can't take, well, I don't know that it says you can't take any name off the list, because GCOM has the authority. Once GCOM says we will clean the list, it can use any method to clean the list. Mark says, all right, that would suit the PPP because they would take off 10,000 and put on 30,000. We went to court on the issue of ID card, and we had the 1997 elections vitiated. ID card is a norm. Who prints the ID card? GCOM. Unless we don't have people in GCOM, I can't see GCOM creating fraudulent ID cards, or unless we as a people decide we're 8 to 4 workers and we leave the field to them after hours. It calls for serious party work, and I think the list should be sanitized, and I firmly believe that there should be house-to-house registration. That brings us to one other problem. The other day, they found that one of the one of the people who been doing the registration was a PPP agent. How many more PPP agents are there doing the registering? How many of them would take my name, for example, and refuse to enter it? So it's a whole ball game with that list, a whole new ball game. House-to-house registration will work, but again, you will have to ensure that you have a representative from each party with the team that's going out. You don't leave the field to any one party. How do we know who is a party person? That is something we'll have to work on. A lot of groundwork. Kidaki said boots on the ground. I agree with him. And it got to start now.
Thank you very much, Brother Adam. Look, our problems as far as elections are concerned are enormous. What that recount showed is the manner in which the PPP was able to rig the elections long before election day. And that is why the petition is important. For me, I don't care what the petition says that the tainted votes were not enough to change the election. That's neither here nor there. What I want is for the petition to establish the areas that the PPP utilize to rig the elections long before election day. Because any legislation that is going to clean up our electoral architecture has to know where the scampishness is.
You know, I want to make a quick point. Sorry, I want to make a quick point.
Yes, go ahead.
You know, I don't want to say black people, but I can't help saying it. We had too much of the milk of mother's kindness. In 1997, and I don't hear people talking about that, And Mr. Solomon know what happened. Did not Singh declared the elections before all the votes were counted. And when you talk, he said, go to elections petition.
That's right.
Yes, we went to elections petition, but that petition didn't turn on what Did not Singh did. It turned on the question of ID cards. I remember going to court, and there is, I'm not talking about how many questionable statements, the polls and all of that. That informed the basis of the decision. You know, when they said to Granger, take the oath of office, let them go to election petition, we would have been doing just what Did not Singh was doing. But I know what I sit down and hear OPN try to steal democracy and all kind of things.
Right.
Just to add to Adam, the point of Mark making early in 2006, even with the petition, we knew what occurred. We knew what Mines did in squatting in that seat in Region 10. But the matter went on till into the next election, like the 1997 situation. So I am not saying that we will not see where the issues are to be addressed should we move to have the legislative changes. I think we know what the issues are. I think we also have to modify what we have and advance. You know, we're still looking at the structure the way it was and asking how we can still stand on those foundations when we have moved to times so advanced that we can build better foundations. And I'm saying to you, and a wider discussion, if you have commissioners at GCOM who are pitching ideas such as biometrics, I think the parties, if not accepting those ideas, should themselves also come up with better suggestions. I know they're playing it safe by not saying whether they will participate or not in an election with the current list. But that doesn't take away the responsibility of also suggesting, then what do we do to address the current state of the list?
And that is the question before us. Those of us who remember the 2006 campaign would remember the PNC making it very clear that unless you have a proper voters list, they were not going to contest that election. And at the last moment, they did contest with a faulty voters list and got 34% of the vote. The question is, should they this time be very decisive about whether they participate in an election in which the voters list is bloated, in which there are other areas. Obviously, those 47 boxes, somebody tampered with them, or somebody's tampered with them. So even if we get a proper voters list, we have to deal with the question of tampering with boxes. We have to deal with issues of people giving certificates for workers. You have 100 workers and you give out 600 certificates. Where the other 500 went? So apart from the voters list, there are other areas of the electoral architecture that needs dealing with. What happens to that little black girl who's in Enterprise at 5:45 in the evening? Is she worrying about protecting a ballot box? Or is she worrying about protecting her life? What do we do? Because we know from 5 to 6 is what they call happy hour. So they are, what that recon showed is, although the tag of rigging has been left on the PNC, the real riggers are the PPP. Because the PPP understand how porous the electoral architecture is. And they go for those areas that is not to our naked eye. How a box from Region 4 ended up in Region 5? Somebody had to take it there. Somebody had to take it there. That is why I think the election petition finally is important. It won't tell me or tell us around this table what went on. We know what went on. But for those external people who are swayed by what happened in 2020, an election petition that spins up the PPP in multiple areas of the architecture is very important. We can sit here and say the PPP rigged the election, and they did. If the coalition rigged, PPP rigged more than them, as Mark is saying. But sometimes you have to go beyond what you say and you sing. And you have to make it very clear to forces that are powerful who the real riggers are. Sometimes it's not really for those of us who are part of the choir. It is for those who innocent and not so innocent believe that the coalition rigged the election. We have to prove once and for all that the PPP rigged that election massively. Massively. And that the elections, as the Americans say, the results are disputed. Not me say so. The Americans say it was a disputed election. There's some bad dogs there. Is Adam dog? You're well protected, Adam.
All right, okay. Hold on. Yeah, continue.
Yes, Mark, should the opposition draw a line in the sand?
You know, Dr. Hines, I'm glad that you have taken the position now that the evidence, the preponderance of evidence point in the direction of the PPP rigging the March 2020 general elections. Because had you not done that, remember the coalition and the WPA plays a part of that coalition. And you don't want the PPP, in my opinion, who are the real riggers, to point a finger in the direction of the coalition that included the WPA as well.
Mark, I took that position while it was going on. Yes. I have not declared a win of the election. I said the election was a draw. Right? The minimum it was a draw. We should have.
It couldn't be. It could not have been a draw. Hold on. Evidence point. Go ahead.
Hold on, Mark. Let me make my point.
Sure.
My position is that the PPP said they see rigging. The coalition said they see rigging. All right, two thieves make God laugh. Right? You all declare it a draw, set up an interim government, and let that government be responsible for cleaning up the areas of rigging. Lowenfield said the same thing. He said, based on what I noticed here, I cannot declare a winner in this election. Vincent Alexander said the same thing. Now, my point is, we see rigging. They say they see their rigging. I can't give them me eye, and I don't want their eye. The fact of the matter is that both major parties made charges of rigging, and the election should not have been awarded to one side.
You know, Dr. Hines, forget about what both, with all due respect, forget about what both sides are saying.
Yeah.
Let's look at what the evidence, what are the evidence put out there? The evidence show that there were massive rigging on the part of the PPP. So the elections cannot be drawn. The PPP has rigged the elections based on what came out of the recount process. It shows massive rigging on the part of the PPP. But look,
Election petitions prove that.
let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, Dr. Hines and others. We're talking about the bloated voters list. Now, since I was a little boy growing up under quarantine, I heard that the population was 750,000 people. It has never changed. It is still 750,000 people all those years after. You know what is going to turn this thing around and prove the PPP wrong? Something that they're afraid and they're against of is the census. When
We
last
had,
have we had a census?
Mark, we had one that declared the figures. And that census showed that the population of Guyana, and it included the Brazilians who were working at the time,
500.
742,000.
That is not accurate.
But no, Mark,
The census right now, because every year thousands of people migrated, and the majority of those people are persons of Guyanese Indian extraction.
We're due for a
Thousands upon
census this year,
thousands,
Mark.
and the PPP is afraid of a census because what will come out of that census is our population is no longer 700 and something thousand. It is below 600 and something thousand.
all right. So, Mark, should the opposition draw a line in the sand?
If they're going to draw a line in the sand,
As it
that the
relates
waves,
to
that
contesting
the waves will come
election,
and
will
wash
break
that
the
sand
system.
away. They got to do more than just drawing a sand in the line, right? A line in the sand. They got to do more than that. The evidence, I think someone mentioned that, Adam Harris. I'm agreeing with Adam Harris for the first time in maybe 60-something years, right? That we got to focus on GCOM. Look at who is at the helm there. Claudette Singh. People have no confidence, majority of the people have no confidence in Claudette Singh sitting there as the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission. Then the PPP put someone else, Vishnu Prasad, that they're comfortable with as CEO. Then they're going to stack all of the other positions with people that they're comfortable with so that the cooking process can be healthy in the next general elections and regional elections. We got to keep an eye on them, not just sit in the sand and draw a line because the water going to come and wash away the sand and what happens thereafter. We got to be vigilant. Otherwise, we back to square one again and cry about corruption, cry about rigged elections, like what happened in 97, like what happened in 2001, like what happened in 2006, 2011, and what the PPP did again in 2020. We're going to keep crying and crying and crying. I don't know. I'm just tired.
I want to make a quick point
Go ahead, Adam.
You know, when Jimmy Carter came here in 1990, and he set up that structure for GCOM, it was only intended for the 92 elections.
Yes.
I can tell you that after the 2011 elections, when the opposition ended up, when you had a minority government, a couple of the commissioners there, the British High Commissioner was one, in a statement said, you would have to change the structure of GCOM. It is not relevant in these conditions. You can't have party people anymore on GCOM. The attempt to have that modified when we had that Jamaican to come in as CEO was tossed aside. And I say deliberately, we need a GCOM that is void of party people. You can be a supporter. I ain't gonna ask you who you vote for, but we must have a GCOM that appears to be independent all along. If we got to recruit people from outside, let us do it.
Dr. Amsterdam, Ms. Kadaki, still on with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, Kadaki, you heard Mark, you heard Adam about how we solve this problem. What do you think? How are we going to get free and fair election in Guyana?
Well, I've already answered that question, quite frankly. Free and fair election, one of the important elements is the voters list to start with.
Yeah, no, but I hear you. You said that, but I'm saying.
You asked me a question.
Yes, I know, but let me clarify my question. My question is, we have identified these things. How do we get them done? That's the issue. How do we get the PPP to pass the legislation? They're not. How do we get GCOM to change that GCOM system? Do you think either party would give up their representation on GCOM for this independent thing that Adam speaks about, which is quite credible? But in real politics, do you think the PPP and the PNC will say we are coming off of GCOM? The question is, we have identified the problems. We have said we can use biometrics, we can use legislation, we can use this. How do we get both parties to?
And I'm saying I've answered that question already.
Modified my question now.
I have answered that question already. I'm saying that the opposition has to dig its heels in. Nobody believed. I doubt whether any of the opposition parties in the 80s into the 90s believed that the PNC was going to give up the advantage that it had. But continuous pressure from the PCD, the other, the next, the intervention of Carter eventually resulted in the PNC giving ground. And we are here today. And I am saying that if we want to see changes, we have to take a firm stand. We have to dig our heels in. You were asking if the opposition should draw a line in the sand. The opposition should draw many lines. Right? As a matter of fact, let me refrain that. The opposition should draw a very visible line and stand by it with all of its supporters and say we are not going to have an election. We're not going to allow an election until these things are put in place, until these criteria, until we have a proper voters list, until we have, if we want, biometrics, until these things are in place, until the system is cleaned up, and we can guarantee the citizens of this country a fair election, we are not going to participate, and we're not even going to allow any elections to be held. How do you do that? Dig your heels in, get your supporters always on the ready to disrupt the system. It's simple. I mean, a lot of us come here and we talk nice. We talk, what I call it, diplomacy. Diplomacy can go so far and no further. What this administration knows about is brute force and arrogance. And again, it is brute force and arrogance that resulted in the three wise men, if you call them that still, coming to this country, putting both political parties to sit down, and eventually we end up with the Odd Man Stand Accord and all of that, which brought some semblance of order in this country when the PPP was playing the heading good. The same approach is what they know, and if that is what they know, that is the approach is what we have to take, the opposition has to take, to demand the necessary changes. Nothing else is going to get you what you want.
I'm laying it out there very clear. If I may say, we can talk about all the things that needed to change, but after what Kadaki said, what we need in Guyana to get proper elections is a political solution. When you have a political solution, you get things done. In 1997, as Kadaki said, the PNC said elections were rigged. They took to the streets. Every day, 10,000 people on the street. That brought the PPP to the table. What did they get? 2 years of the PPP. 2 years of the PPP term. constitutional reform, arbitration for the public servants, public service workers. You only get fundamental changes in a place like Guyana when there is a political solution. We can disagree on the method to get that solution. That is calling for as he called it, brute force and ignorance. That's not the only way of getting a political solution, although it is perhaps the most effective way, as we have seen in our history. The point is that we have to decide, I think, on whether we are going to reform the system and hope for the best, or we are going to make fundamental changes. That is why, for me, the 2020 election was not about who rigged and who didn't rig. It offered us the best opportunity to upturn the present electoral system and put in place one that eradicates rigging at best, but minimizes it at worst. The young man said the only way we can get them things through brute force and ignorance. Where do you stand on that?
Mark took me to task. My position is anti-brute force. I think human beings got more sense than running up with wood and cutlass to settle disputes with each other. I firmly believe that there are methods. If we can't get dialogue, and it doesn't look like we can get dialogue with Irfaan Ali. So I agree with him. You need to put pressure on the system. You need to get out there and seek all the help you got. You see, you got Exxon out there. Exxon ain't going to be too happy to know that its investment is going to be threatened in an unstable condition. So you use that as leverage to begin with. Let them understand, as Haitwan said, your investment will not be safe. Get them to be involved in the system and let us come up with a solution. I firmly believe that we need a new structure for GECOM. And if we can get a new structure for GECOM, even if it means recruiting officers from overseas, let us do it.
Yes,
the
sir.
political solution in actually brute force and ignorance. Where do you stand on that?
Well, we've been hearing that all the time, and I think Adam says that he's afraid of brute force and ignorance. He doesn't support that. But I want to remind Adam and others who may be thinking like Adam Harris, brute force and ignorance doesn't mean violence. So it is not that because Kadaki say or others would say brute force and ignorance mean that people got to go out there with weapons, cutlass and pitchforks and whatever. It doesn't mean that. It simply means, from a political standpoint, it means that you agitate and you cause good trouble out there. But maybe the likes of Adam Harris is not into good trouble. He believes that sitting at home whilst his dog, I'm sure his dog's name is Akini, and this is not to insult the dog, is barking and ram and blah, blah, and whatever, right? And so forth. He's satisfied with that sort of negotiation. The PPP, and I agree with Kadaki, the PPP is not going to listen to that sort of barking. Ruff, ruff. They're not. Boots on the ground. But we've been calling for boots on the ground for a while, but nobody wants to bell the cat. Nobody wants to bell the cat. Kadaki tried something. He went in front of the Ministry of Education. They grabbed him. Mr. Orby Norton, well, he said he didn't try something. He was walking in a corner. They grabbed him and put him on the bench for about half hour, 45 minutes. And that was the end of everything, right? That is not good. The PPP is not going to listen to that sort of things. Brute force and ignorance indeed. It doesn't mean violence. It means going, getting your troops on the ground, the PNC, the WPA, y'all grab whatever little y'all got, go on the ground. It makes up numbers, right? Don't just sit and say, because what I see is the blame game. Who is not doing what? AFC is not doing X, WPA is not doing Y, and the PNC, they seem to have whatever internal struggle that's going on. And nobody wants to go out there and bail the cat. Nobody wants to go out there and confront the PPP. Everybody seems to be afraid of a little locking up, of a little sitting down on the bench, of a little handcuff on their hands, or whatever. It's not going to, we're not going to get success. We're not going to get freedom if we all think like that. Brute force and ignorance. It doesn't mean violence, Adam. It doesn't mean
Mark, we had that in 92 when a lot of people were disenfranchised because they had this white ballot. Since the people say, all right, y'all behave bad, come and vote, and Dr. Reed told them those votes won't be counted. We started street protests in 92. You ended up with the PPP for 5 years. We had street protests in 97. It took an election petition to shorten the term. We had street protests in 2001, and that was the last street protest. Could you tell me what these street protests achieved?
Now let me show you this. In 1997, it achieved something. In 2001, there were thousands upon thousands of people on the streets. The PPP cannot get away with certain things. They do not like massive street protests. And they laugh. They laugh, such as alleged oil thieves and crooks and so forth at Guy Oil. One of them watching the show right now. They laugh when they see 3 and 4. I remember the days when Dr. Hines, it was myself, Dr. Hines, Lincoln Lewis, and just 1 or 2 others out there protesting. Come on. Whatever happened in 2001, Adam, you were there at Prime News and so forth, covering 10,000 people at the Square of the Revolution. 15.
What did we achieve? What did we achieve?
Brothers, let's get Sharma in. Sharma, we know we are not going to be able to control the PPP. We know we are not going to be able to speak reasonably to the people. We know that the system doesn't allow for inclusion despite Article 14, right? We know that the Constitution is not explicit in what it means by inclusivity. We, in effect, live in a winner-take-all system. And so the things that are needed to be done cannot be done from inside the system. It cannot be done through reason. It cannot be done through cajoling the people, because we are dealing with some tough nuts, right? How do we get to the point where we can force these solutions that we're talking about?
I think a few things, Dr. Hines, and we are speaking as though, and I heard Mark mention it in part a bit, in isolation of understanding the current political environment that we're in, especially with regards to opposition forces and opposition voices, challenging issues such as the elections and the electoral system of itself. And if the PPP would concede in any way to ensure we have a reformed system. To speak in isolation takes away from the fact that the effectiveness of even drawing a line in the sand or taking certain actions such as, and I want to make this point quite clear, that we should never take any option off the table, whether those are parliamentary or extra parliamentary position, because, and more so, constitutional positions we should not take off the table, including taking to the streets, which is a constitutional right. But I made that point so that we can understand that this requires a level of organization that brings the forces together in a manner that they understand where they want to go, How do they want the system to be changed? We are speaking about house-to-house registration. We are speaking about voter verification. We are speaking about legislation to amend things, and even in itself, reconstruct or amend what is happening at GCOM, whether they're electoral reforms of how we go about applying different mechanisms for verification. So we are speaking all of these things, and we don't have a collective voice at this moment that sits in the room that says this is the opposition. We don't have an opposition leader. We don't have in Parliament at this moment the sort of organized position of understanding the parliamentary agenda that to even take this matter into consideration, how it's going to be articulated. Outside of that, the PNC have made its point quite clear that it recognized positions with the list that is unacceptable. But beyond that, you have to now say, how do you defend the position that you want to advance? And that's the point I made earlier. They have not advanced a position except to say they will not move forward with the current state of the list. Yeah. And I think until that position is advanced, then you can start to organize forces around such a position. And I believe that is the point they're at. You have to see what is context at the moment. And I think Mark is correct. Though we wait on that, the PPP is not taking any prisoners. They're continuing to abuse the system. But we cannot speak as though we don't know what needs to be done. But to get it done, it requires a process of forces coming together. And I'm making the 90 position quite obvious, because that is what occurred. You yourself attest to this, Dr. Hines. And besides the coming together, do not overlook the importance of all of those external forces, because every time we mention of an election, whether it's 97, whether it's 2006, whether it's 2000, it's 87, 92, the postponement of 90, foreign partners, even 2020, we have never seen an ambassador more active, a high commissioner more active than we've actually seen them in the streets. They were literally in the streets, running from building to building, managing our election. I am saying you cannot overlook of all the elections, their presence and more pronounced presence in 2020, and not say that they have to be approached as a very significant factor as we move forward to any reforms before we proceed with any elections.
And you know, what is really beautiful about a program like this is that we can have 4 people who, I'm not saying have different views, but different emphasis. You know, I mean, Brother Kidaki is emphasizing street protest. Brother Mark seemed to be leaning in that direction. Adam is cautious. And Chama, you raised the important point there. When you struggle, you take nothing off the table. The 1990 conclusion that Kidaki talked about, after the 85 election, the PCD was formed. All the opposition parties had an organization. Every month they were up in Washington, lobbying. When one team was up in Washington, another team gone through the Caribbean, right? You had Indians from the PPP and Africans who supported the WPA. So you had some multiracialism. The conditions were different and the organization was different, right? They fought on all fronts, brute force and ignorance. Yes, I know that well. It was part of that, but that wasn't the only story in town, right? See, so we have to talk about the movement, and it can't be a movement that's going to wait until next week. And one of the things I think we all agree on is that we need a movement for free and fair elections like no, because it is only out of that you will get changes. No political party anywhere in the world is going to give up without struggle. Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without man. Mandela says there comes a time in the life of any nation when you're left with choices, submit or demand. I think we are at that point. I think we all agree we are at that point. But we can't go into this fight. You over there, me over here, me over there, you over there, or within we party, this group over there, this group over there, we're going to be beaten. And every time we have won anything significant in Guyana or the Caribbean, it is when the forces have been united. And you don't have to wait for the perfect unity. You don't have to wait for the perfect unity. But the fact that the opposition parties are not even informally meeting to say, boy, we under pressure. And this thing called for everybody. We're not even having that. And I can say that because I belong to the leadership of one party. Nobody on call me. And when I talk to people from the other parties, we're talking about, David, any meeting. You do not go into battle without your battle clothes on. All right? I just want to say that as a veteran, I think I got, Mark, I think I got some stripes to be able to start, right? We need a movement like today. Because in societies like Guyana, when there is not a movement with clear objectives, other forces, as we saw in 2002, come in to that vacuum. And what Adam is saying, don't poo-poo it. When people reach the point of frustration that the opposition supporters are, and they smell something, it could get out of hand. And it could consume even those of us who are saying brute force and ignorance. Brute force and ignorance that is out there on its own is not good for anybody. I think I can take the liberty to say that's what Adam Harris is saying. He may not put it over, that's the way I put it over. Right? But we cannot take nothing off the table. You can't tell your enemy you're not going to use brute force and ignorance. You also can't tell them that you're not going to use pressure, moral suasion, moral persuasion. You cannot tell them you're not going to lobby the powers that be. You know, you take nothing off the table. Everything is on the table, as my brother Malcolm X said, by any means necessary. I take time to read all newspapers in Guyana, so I have a sense of what the other side is thinking. In the Guyana Times, one of my friends over there wrote this weekend, there are some fringe radicals from the 70s who are trying to inject in the process the 70s approach. I know it's me talking to. My brother, yes, that's me role. I got troops. I can't call 10,000, 20,000 at the revolution. What I can do is to prepare our people to go to the spirit of revolution with the tools that they need. Call it 1970s tactics. I don't give a goddamn about it. We all have roles to play, right? And that's one thing we have to learn as opposition people. Everybody can't play the same role. There's a role for Adam, who get old now. He has seen it all. And he's saying, pick me, Bush got his, be careful, right? There's a role for that wise man at the top here. You know, I remember in the days when we were on the rampage, young, and you move in, and the elder Guyana would, in a very soft voice, say one or two things, and it makes you stop. Hey, you been there. You've been there. So yes, we need the hot heads, right? We need the cool heads. And we need some heads in between. Brothers, I think we have brought all those perspectives here tonight, that we're at a point where something has to give. Mark Belcher, closing thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Hines. And I don't want Adam and I have gone way back, almost over 30 years. I remember, and this is in public domain, everybody feel they're hurt. I remember when unjustly the corrupt PPP regime tried to shortchange Adam on his pension. Adam wanted to ensure that he fight by every and any means necessary, brutal force, run from Corriverton all the way to Pokwani to ensure that he fought for his pension. He left no stone unturned, none whatsoever. He's laughing. Who feels it knows it. The people of Guyana are punishing under this installed PPP regime.
I never got my pension.
But that's not the point. Was not whether you got your pension or not. You were willing to fight for your pension. Am I correct?
Yes, Mark.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Hines? Thank you, Adam Harris. Who feels it knows? For 400 years, our African enslaved ancestors who were forced into slavery. Just imagine if the older ones in slavery turned to the younger ones like Kofi, Davian, and the other young ones and said, bye, y'all don't worry with this freedom thing. Y'all don't worry fighting massa. This thing never work. Just be a nice slave. Go in the field and work hard. Watch your brothers and sisters and kids raped, murdered, hung, all manner of brutalities. Not do nothing. Just watch and let me talk peacefully. I remember there was a book that I read. There was a slave who said, and I want Adam, if the operator, please, I want to watch Adam's face. Please, operator. Please. There was, thank you, Adam, listen carefully. This enslaved African said that when me talk to Massa peacefully, Massa no listen. One day he took Massa rifle, not to kill Massa, but he pointed his rifle at Massa. And Massa said, you take everything you want, including your freedom, and to take all of the others with you. Adam, nothing comes easily in this life. We cannot sit down and just talk. There got to be action. And I hope after this program, Dr. Hines will pick up the phone and call his friends in the leadership bracket at Congress Place to say that it's time for boots on the ground. We can't keep changing the goalpost and say that there will be boots on the ground. Let's kick out one leader and install another leader. And automatically there will be change and we will have boots on the ground. We're not seeing boots on the ground. We're hearing other excuses. But now we're hearing we don't have an opposition leader. Otherwise, if we had an opposition leader, things would have done. I agree that we need an opposition leader. But what happens when we have an opposition leader and nothing is being done? What are we going to do? What are we going to say? We keep changing the goalposts. Gosh, God help our country. God help our people who are punishing with corrupt individuals who are fraudsters, flatfoot hustlers, going at Guy Oil and other places and robbing the people. Taxpayers of this country, vagabonds. Those are the vagabonds who have no shame. Some of them are on this live talking about democracy, talking about the PNC, and talking about what is right and wrong. These vagabonds, one of them have right here, have no shame.
Mark Belcher.
Here our country is right. Adam, I would say a prayer for you, Adam. Father, wake Adam Harris up right now and let him see. Let him see.
Adam, closing thoughts.
You know, Mark is right. I've been here, and you too, you know. I've been here from the elections in 1964 until now. I have seen a lot. And I want to remind Mark about something that he ain't talked about. They had a jailbreak in 2002. 5 men get out there, and suddenly you had a group of gunmen who wreaked havoc. Ministers were afraid to sleep in their own homes. What came of that? Those men turned on some of the people who were supporting them. You know, this force that you talk about don't work. It don't work. Don't work like that. And I am not afraid. I am just cautious. And as things said, let us use all available options. Violence is a last resort.
I don't know if the elder here with us tonight.
No, Dr. Hines, I am not preaching violence.
All right.
I am not preaching violence.
No, you're not, and Adam is not teaching paradise either.
Okay, I'm sure he's.
You're
I'm
close
sure
enough.
Adam.
You know, with all due respect, every time I hear Adam go down a certain line, it aggravates me, honestly. And I am not.
Right to, but he has a right to. We are
Yes.
not a monolith. We are not a monolith.
All I'm saying it aggravates me, and I have a right to that opinion. It aggravates me.
Yes, but we have never won anything as a monolith. We are a diverse people.
I am saying it.
We are diverse.
Adam has identified.
Views. I wouldn't allow you all to be jumping on him like that. Closing thoughts, Kidaki Amsterdam.
Adam has identified a number of instances when lots of people are out there challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
And he has asked every time, what has that achieved? Right? Let me say to you that every time thousands of people took to the streets in this country, they achieved something or the other towards what they wanted. Let us not treat that lightly. Even with the jailbreak and the chaos that erupted in this country, for whatever reason, changes were achieved in this society. Earlier, I think it was you, Dr. Hines, who said, one of the things which can help is helping Exxon to understand that its investments can be safe in this kind of climate. The only way Exxon will come to understand that its investment can be safe it is if the words of the opposition is backed up by action. Otherwise, as old people say, motar different to guitar. All we have been doing, as I'm saying, is talking diplomacy. And this cabal and the enablers don't respect diplomacy. Like we agree. The battle must be fought on all fronts. Nothing must be taken off the table. But critical affront is showing that the people are behind the opposition in making the demands. The other thing I want to point out is, regardless of the struggles we struggle to achieve free and fair elections, the opposition has work to do. Because we have to safeguard the gains of free and fair elections. And I'm of the opinion that that work should have started yesterday in terms of preparing the people to safeguard the gains of a free and fair election. You, Dr. Hines, raised the question. When a representative of the coalition goes out there, a young lady goes out there, and it is 5 in the morning or 6 in the evening, what are they thinking about? We must be able to prepare our people and Put systems in place. For that very young lady in the polling station knows that her backings are on the streets, in the environment of that polling station. And so when she cries foul, they will rise to the occasion. That is what will get us the gains and protect the gains that we are working towards. Diplomacy is important. Putin tried diplomacy. Putin tried diplomacy, but at the end of the day, to protect his territory and what he stands for is in Ukraine right now. And according to the news, they are civilized people. I rest my case.
Chairman Solomon, closing thoughts? Chairman? Is Chairman still with us?
You guys, I'm with you guys. You hear me?
Yes, Chairman.
Let me thank you for having me on the program, Doc, and to the panelists, the other panelists. Thanks for being your company. I think it's just a different in perspective that we see, and I'll jump in and play a bit here with both for Mark and Kidaki on this side and for Adam on this side in terms of there is a liberalist approach in Adam's attempt to ensure that you work to build coalition, to ensure dialogue and diplomacy. And even as you look at the Ukraine-Russian war, even in the midst of the war and all the killings, they're still speaking, they're still engaging. You don't ever shut the doors to diplomacy. It's never closed. In fact, it is going to be the final arbiter in how you proceed after whatever confrontation. So you have to keep the door of diplomacy open. You have to speak, you have to engage. And I see that point even to the extent of how do you build working coalitions, which could also be as effective to get you to that destination. As we saw again in 2006, there was no massive street invasion in 2006. In 2011, there were no massive street invasions. In 2015, the same thing. We worked, we built coalitions, we built relationships with political parties, with civic societies. The unions were there, the working man, the working woman. We went out, we got the overseas partners or bilateral partners to appreciate that things were not right in Guyana and it must fix. And we took that approach. But I could appreciate also, outside of that liberalist rights to ensure that we build movements and work with coalition, the realist approach of not taking anything off the table and ensuring that we hold a very stubborn and determined People's Progressive Party government to account, to ensure that for no minute of the day, the party should believe that they can take advantage of Guyanese the way they are, using the structures and the systems to do that, whether those are the economic structures to impoverish, to create an unequal and not so equitable society. Those are things that we have to jump in and fight now. But I'm saying to you, Dr. Hines, and to your panelists, the reason why we are not on the move to get to that direction where we feel there is a sense of direction, that we're going east, is because we are not organized. It comes back to the point of how organized we were to get those reforms in the 1990s. It says how organized we were to get those movements from 2006 to 2011 to 2015. And it says today we don't see that level of hopefulness because we don't see that sort of organization. So I think that is where we should be impressing on. Those groups out there in society, not only the political movement, but those unions, those trade unions, understanding the changing dynamics, working to appreciate how do they navigate between at times of the pandemic, at times of economic crisis, a booming economy, changing workforce. How do they bring those articulations together so that they can start to give people a sense of direction of how to challenge the things that are confronting them? And I think until we can come to that point, we will continue to run around saying, what do we do? It's right there. History is on our side on what we have to do.
Thank you very much, Chairman Solomon, Adam Harris, Mark Benschop, Kidaki, Amsterdam. I think what is being demonstrated here tonight is the urgency of the situation before us.
You know, Dr. Hines, I left out 30 seconds of my closing remarks. I asked to get back my 30 seconds. Please.
All right, go ahead.
Let me give an example quickly. When PPP supporters go out and they do all manner of things, burn up road, overthrow car, beat up policeman, beat up nurse, beat up school children, damage their buses, whenever they go out and do all these sort of things, you don't hear about brute force and ignorance. You don't hear about violence. You hear that they are fighting for what is right.
Yeah.
Coalition supporters, you can go out and do what is right. And it is not calling for violence at all. If one set can do it, then it's only fair that the other set do it. Thank you for my turn.
Thank you very much, Mark Benchop. And as I said, we've demonstrated here tonight that we are not a monolith as a people, as an opposition, that we have different emphasis. I don't think we have different views as such, but different emphasis on how we should go. And the important thing is that we have to talk it through and come to a sense of our objectives. What are our objectives? Our objectives obviously must be to win the immediate battle before us. But at the end of the day, we have to win the war, because we have won small battles before. But because we have not won the war, the gains of 97 were not lasting. So we have to keep our eyes on the battle before us, but also on the larger war, which is that whether we win an election, meaning the opposition, or we lose an election, opposition supporters should not have to fear for their lives. Opposition supporters should not have to scrunt to get their fair share of the economic pie. We have to once and for all win this war for equality in this country. Sometimes we worry about winning an election rather than winning freedom. We have to win both an election and win freedom, or there shall be no rest for us in this place. Because the other side is prepared to give us an election here and there, and they tolerate us for 5 years. And while we are busy about our little government, they are plotting behind to take away our freedom as they did in 2020. My point is, never again should we surrender freedom. Even if they thief an election from us, they must not be able to steal our freedom. That's my message. That's my message. That's my message. And it calls for all hands on deck. I stave off brothers here from jumping on Adam. I don't necessarily agree with Adam's perspective, but I have seen the usefulness of caution in my long 40-odd years. I've been a radical. Caution sometimes makes radicalism more effective. Go on, tomorrow night we get the elder. Brother UC is going to be on. You all been calling for him, so he's going to be on tomorrow night. See you all then. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Night, night, night.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.